CorelDRAW tips and tricks. Today's session, using pattern fills with Steve Spence. Brought to you by Conde Systems. In today's session, we're going to look at pattern fills. You'll find it located on the left-hand toolbar, almost to the bottom, and if we click and hold on the fill tool, there is a flyout menu. Uniform fills is available online, fountain fills also available online, and then pattern fills, which is what we're going to look at today. When we click on pattern fills, we get a flyout menu that looks like this. Notice pattern fill at the top, and on the left-hand side, you'll see that there are actually three types of pattern fill that we can work with: two color, full color, and bitmap. In the center is a small sample of the pattern that we might work with. If we click on the arrow, we get a flyout menu that shows even more. And there are all kinds of these. Let's take this one, which looks something like the Canadian maple leaf. We'll click on that and OK. And you can see in our box what it's done. It's inserted automatically those maple leaves into a pattern. Let's pull that back up. And now we will change that a little bit. Let's say, for instance, we want our front, that is the maple leaf, to be a dark green and the background to remain white. And we click on that and there we are. We can do a reverse of it as well just by saying we want white. Go up till we find it, and then the background we want to be a dark green. And there you are. We have some control over the pattern that we're going to fill our object with. We can do other things with it as well. If we look down at this box, these two boxes, you can see that the size of the maple leaf is 4 inches. Now that might be fine if you're doing the side of a bus, but probably for our work we'll want to do something much smaller. Let's take it down to 1 inch, and we need to take both of them in order to keep the perspective right, and we'll click OK. Now we have a more reasonable pattern, probably for what it is that we're working with. One of the other things that we'll look at real quick here is this transform pair of numbers. It becomes helpful. Although the skew is probably not going to be something you ever use, the rotate will be. Let's put in 90 degrees. Click OK, and you can see that it's turned the images 90 degrees. This is helpful for all kinds of applications. Now there are other ways you could do this, but this is built into the pattern fill capability. Okay. Let's look also at origin, which is just above that. This allows us to move the pattern slightly from top to bottom or left to right. And we'll put in 1/10 of an inch just to see what it does. And we'll move this over and click OK, and you can see it moved the pattern down. So that if you want all the maple leaf to show at the bottom, you would want to move it up. If you wanted to split the maple leaf top and bottom, you would move it down. So this allows you within the pattern to have a little control of where it sits. The origin left to right, of course, it's the same thing. Now, what happens if we change the size of the box? Well, let's do that. And you see it just continues with the same pattern. No matter what we do to the box, it just continues to repeat the pattern. There is a pattern in this, obviously, and we'll see that even more later on, but this pattern just continues to repeat. Okay, we'll bring this back up again, And I want to show you a mistake that is commonly made with the fountain fill. You notice that we did increase the size of the box, which duplicates or quadruples or whatever the pattern that's inside. I want you to notice that one of the things that you can do is you can mirror this just using this tool. Now the problem with that is, as you notice, it gets confused with its own pattern. And although this might be decorative, it certainly is not what we started with. We're going to undo that, and let me show you how to do that correctly so that it doesn't mess up the pattern. And that is just with the typical mirror approach. We go to Arrange, Transformations, Scale and Mirror. Now when we go to our Docker on this particular item, we're going to get a surprise, because when we click on Change, nothing seems to happen. Try it again. You saw it flash on the screen, but nothing seemed to happen. The reason for that is, remember, we rotated this 90 degrees. So far as the computer program is concerned, it did what we told it to do. Instead of rotating it like we typically do, let's go down and rotate the y-axis instead. And when we do, we get the expected result. When we create a fill, it remembers the orientation that it originally goes into the object with. Confused? I hope not. But if we had not rotated this, then we would have used the upper button, the x-axis button, and mirrored this from left to right. But because we rotated it, we will have to use the y-axis, that is top to bottom, in order to get it to reverse. Having learned the most complicated part of the entire process, let's move on. Just a couple more things on this two-color pattern fill before we move on to full color, and that is the Browse button, which allows you to go into your own computer files and pull up something else. This works with all kinds of patterns, not just the ones that Corel has created. The other button is the Create button. On this, you can actually create your own design and save it as part of the pattern fill. Typically, it's much easier just to create your pattern in CorelDRAW and then save it. Let's look at full color. In full color, we'll see a series of patterns that we can pick up and put into our objects. And we'll start with this one. This is safety bars, perhaps, running at a 45-degree angle. And of course, all of these other features continue to function just as they did previously. And let's put it in the box. And as we see, it goes into the box. It is pretty much useless. Not going to be able to do too much with that just because those lines are so big. But let's go back, and just as we did before, we're going to reduce those to, let's take them to 1/2 inch. And now we kind of see a little bit more of a workable pattern. Now I want to draw your attention to something that sometimes happens. If you look very closely, you might be able to see that there is a jagged line across those horizontal lines, or those diagonal lines. That is an optical illusion, if you will. If we zoom in on those, you see that they're perfectly all right. What's happening there is we are actually crossing pixels on the screen, and they don't perform very well when you're working with diagonal lines. So sometimes you get this, and if you want to make sure it really is just an optical illusion, zoom in on it, and you'll know exactly what's taking place. Now these full color pattern fills are handled the same way as the two color. There's really not much to show you that's different from what we were doing before, except maybe the rotation. Let's go down and rotate this, just so you know that this is an easy way to get vertical lines as well as diagonal lines. You don't have to leave these exactly the way they were. You can always go in and modify them so that it saves you some work. Let's look at another package. Let's go down and pick Plaid. Plaid has gone in now at 45 degrees. And the reason it did that is because we did not change the rotation. So let's take it back to 0. Click OK, and it goes back in the way we would expect it. Perhaps you want it at 45, and of course you can do that. And we can increase the size, we can reduce the size. Doesn't make any difference. The pattern just continues to repeat itself. Let's go back and look at one other thing. Again, you can browse your own computer for different patterns that might work. The next portion of pattern fill we'll look at are the bitmaps. This is the one that I use by far the most. And again, if we click on the arrow, we get a number of bitmap fills. And these work a little differently than the others. Let's take this one, for instance, just to demonstrate my point. We can increase this until we get the entire pattern. And you'll see the other pattern is there. So obviously it is just repeating a pattern. And you can control the size of the pattern by these two number lines, just like we did before. We now have a 4-inch tile, for instance. If you want to use that as a background for a ceramic tile, you could do that. Some ceramic tiles are 4 1/4, so we can take it to 4 1/4, make our box 4 1/4, and lo and behold, we have a perfect tile. Let's take our box to 4 1/4, and there's a perfect tile background. So these do have very practical applications for a number of different functions. Now let's go back and look at this again. Let's take this one, for instance. I'm not sure what that is, but it looks interesting. It looks like maybe they're candy pieces, and they just continue to repeat themselves. And no matter how far out we go, they just continue to repeat themselves. They are a pattern, however. And if you look carefully right through here, you can see that that is a repeating pattern. And it repeats and overlaps with the previous one over and over. Note this little piece of paper versus this little piece of paper. That's the overlap. Those are duplicates. Now we can control that somewhat again by using our size options. But those are patterns. That's what this is about. They will repeat the same pattern over and over and over again. Let's look at this one. I find this one very, very useful as a background. Notice if you look carefully, there is something sticking out of the concrete here, and something here, something down here, and something here. Those are part of the pattern. Here it is again, there it is again. That's part of the pattern. No matter what you do, that pattern will continue to repeat itself. Sometimes it makes no difference. That's what you would expect in a block wall like this one. But sometimes it gets a bit obvious. And in those situations, you just have to do something else or massage it in whatever way you can by changing the size of it, that kind of thing. Now, as we look at our patterns and what's available, let's take a look at this one, because I use this one a lot. Oops. There it is. And this is just a brick wall. So far as I know, someone went out and took a picture of a brick wall and created a pattern with it. That's precisely what it is. And if you look very carefully, you can see the pattern repeats. These blocks right here are exactly the same as these bricks right here. So the pattern is repeating. Yet as we look for a brick wall to use as a background or in creating some kind of graphic, this just saves so much trouble. And the human eye is going to see that, and it probably will never pick up that pattern, especially if it has something laid over top of it, like text or a graphic of some kind, etc. So these patterns are just incredibly useful. Let's go back and look at it one more time. And this time we're going to take advantage of a button right down here called More. We always like more. More is good. And what it's going to do is present us with additional patterns. And some of these are just really cool. These patterns have to be downloaded. They are actually on the web, and we are addressing the web and asking them to allow us to download these patterns. Let's click on one, tell it download, and we'll let it download. And now we have that pattern in our library, and we can use it as much as we want to. These are free. They come with later versions of CorelDRAW. All you have to do is go in and download them, just like I did right there. Now, I have no idea what this is. It might be a tree trunk. I'm not sure what it is. It certainly is an interesting pattern, but it is a pattern. You notice that this line of whatever that is identical to this line of whatever that is. So they are patterns. They repeat themselves. That's the whole thing. And if you want variety in your background, pattern's probably not going to work for you. But most of us can live with that pattern without any problem at all. Also, the Browse button allows you to go into your own computer and pick an image. We'll click Browse, and in this case I'm going to take it to my main hard drive, and I happen to know exactly where there are some images, and here's files and files and files of my own images that I've used for one purpose or another. And this happens to be a church that I've done a lot of work for, and we'll click on that and import it. There it is. Now if we click on that, it's going to import it as a pattern. And as you can see, it's all sigoggled and obviously isn't much value to anyone. But if we go back and look at that pattern fill again, and we tell it to rotate 90 degrees and click on it, now we have something that, although it's still a pattern, it might be used as a background for something for this particular church. Maybe you only want 2 or 3 of those. Maybe you want bunches of them in order to create an interesting, useful background. Let's change it to 1 inch and 1 inch. And there we have something that might be used for a background. This can be done with anything virtually in your computer. All you have to do is pull it in. Let's say, for instance, we're going to create a piece of text for them. And we'll just type out here, First Church. And we're going to make that very, very big. And before we do anything else, we'll get rid of this so we can see what we're doing. And it is now, that church is now named First Church. And we're going to take a very bold font, and we're going to put an outline around it, and we're going to empty out the contents of that. And we're going to have to make it very big to demonstrate what I want you to see. And we'll go back to that now. pattern fill, and there is the church that we used, and we're going to set that at 90 degrees because we know it's turned sideways. And there is the steeple repeated over and over and over in that text. Let's go back one more time. Let's see if we can find something a little more useful. Go back and make it 1 inch instead of 4 inches. And there we have lots and lots of steeples. Now notice that the positioning might be changed to improve where it falls, but you can see that logo, that church building, whatever it is, can be spread out throughout the text and create a really interesting design. Might turn somebody on and make them happy with your work. Okay, that pretty much gives you an introduction into pattern fills and some of the things that you can do with them. Hope you find it helpful. Good luck.